Thank you. I was going to try to get you guys all excited, but I think that already happened, so I don't need to do that. Hey, they started the end of my slides, so let's get the beginning. Come on, ready? Okay. It's killing me. No, I'm kidding. Because I have to have the first slide. I can't start without it. All right. You know, I can do some dancing, right? Oh, that's the last slide. That's all right, I'll start because we're getting there. One of the things that's amazing to me about being here in this community is how much energy and how much growth, and to see this community of designers grow so quickly is just amazing to me. 14 years ago, I think I was at the very first IXDA meeting ever in New York. There were about 20 people. We were at a tapas bar, so maybe there's a connection there. And the second meeting, there were only 4 people that showed up. And now, if you look globally around the world, the number of people who are part of this community is amazing. And just to see the size of this community is, you know, it's sort of mind-blowing to me. So anyway, let's start. We have the slides. Okay, so on the side here is a picture from a deck of cards from Charles and Ray Eames. How many people know who the Eames are? People know who Charles and Ray Eames are? They were mid-century modern designers in the United States. And I argue probably the first interaction designers, because in the 60s and early 70s, they did a lot of work with IBM, and they did mixed media, avant-garde films, and studio exhibits, and modern sort of exhibition design. Also, a lot of very contemporary furniture. But they were the sort of starting beginning point. And this talk for us is going to be about a journey around the materiality of software. And my background, I'm an architect by background. I didn't enter this space, out of design school straight into interaction design. I was an architect first. And so I have this sort of affiliation with an affinity to materials. And I think we're in a moment where there's a change that's happening that we need to be paying attention to. So a couple of things. Right now, it's actually a pretty good time to be a designer, right? It's good things for us. And as a community, a lot of interest and notice by business is being placed on people like us and you, all of you in this environment, to be successful. On the left here is a chart from the Design Management Institute that tracks a stock index of companies that have design as a core competency and how they outperform their peers. Now, this is from 4 years ago, but it tells you that design-led organizations actually are more successful in almost every industry. And business is starting to pay attention to it. The article on the right from Harvard Business Review is from last summer, and it really talked about the need for organizations that are operating in digital transformation and trying to create new services and being worried about being disrupted, that they needed to build design as a competency. So that's awesome. And look, we have this community of 1,500 people here. Give yourself all a big round of applause for coming. You should not minimize the impact of just getting together has on your careers and on the profession and the things that you're doing in the world. You are all involved in making our lives better because you care about people and the things that they're doing. So things are pretty awesome right now, and they're getting better. Now, it's not great for everybody. Some of us are in situations where the engineering organization doesn't understand us, or the business side of the company doesn't quite understand how to work with us. But we're ascendant, and there are many of us who are moving into more strategic positions in organizations. And so there's a path, there's a picture. And we have moments like these, right? So I don't know if you've seen the Vince Vaughn movie where they did these stock pictures, but, everyone's happy, right? We're doing great. Business loves what we're up to. But, and there is a but, and by the way, I translated the titles a little bit into Portuguese, so you'll have to bear with me. So there is a but, mas, there are some things going on right now that if we don't pay attention to, we're going to be in trouble. And so I hope in the conversation and time we have together, I can explain at least my perspective on what those are, and maybe you can pay attention to them if they're of interest to you. But take it for what it's worth. These are things that I'm seeing that are going on in our community. So there's some risk. And there's some issues that are coming that could maybe make our lives a little harder. And so what are they? So we're in this arena of platforms, disruptive platforms. You know, we've seen it with Uber. We've seen it with Airbnb. We're seeing it with, cloud infrastructures. I work at Google. We have Google Cloud, Amazon Web Services. It's happening. The software deconstruction of the world is happening in front of our eyes at all times. There's a Mark Andreessen who is from Netscape and, is one of the big venture capitalists in Silicon Valley. And he wrote an op-ed in 2011 called "Software's Eating the World." And platform technologies are changing business together. Now, if it's an overused model, but if you're in the taxi business, it's not a great place to be right now if you're competing with a platform like Uber, right? So there's this disruptive technology thing going on. And many of us in this room are working on this and are very familiar with it. There's the cloud, right? So I didn't translate this because I think it's just the cloud everywhere you go. But anyway, cloud computing is starting, and there are two pieces to cloud computing that people talk about. They talk about mode 1 and mode 2. Mode 1 is sort of learning to close your data center and move your software and applications to a lower cost platform. And mode 2 is all about taking large sums of data and making sense out of it and coming up with insights that can drive your business. So there's a lot of interest going in it. And we're only about 4 to 5% of the way into the cloud transition in established places, in places like Brazil and in the U.S. and in Europe. Other parts of the world aren't even there yet. But large-scale business is moving faster and faster, and it's very disruptive because it's going to go through large organizations and may change the employment characteristics of the engineering organizations that you might be familiar with. And then we have new technology platforms. And the new technology platforms are changing the way that you think about building software, right? So we have business model as a service. You think about subscription-based models. So where I live, we have a small dog. His name's Kobe, after Kobe Bryant, and the basketball player. And he takes a lot of energy to take care of. And so my wife decided to join this thing called Rover. And it's Airbnb for dogs, right? So we have dogs who come and stay with us to play with Kobe and keep him energized. And we get paid to do that. And our kids love it, and it's really fun. You couldn't do that before, right? These business models, the services that are coming up that are enabled by these platforms are dramatically changing the way people have to think about creating services for their customers. Then you have infrastructure as a service. This is just the basics of computing. Instead of installing servers in your own business, you rent time on Amazon servers or on Google servers or Microsoft servers. It's a different model. It's more efficient. It costs less. It uses less energy. Google is carbon neutral, which is totally amazing to me. We started this year, so our data centers run on all renewable energy, which is cool. And then you get to platform as a service, right? So this is where you start to deconstruct software into Lego bricks, and you don't have to build everything from scratch. And if you think about large software companies, let's say Salesforce, which is a customer relationship management software company. If you were building Salesforce today, you wouldn't build it the way that they built it. You would figure out your business model. You would then go provision some servers. And then you would subscribe to the right services, and you'd only focus your attention on your IP, the things that mattered for your business. And you could actually be very disruptive with a small team. And I'll give you, an example. There's a company in the sort of social workspace, Web 2.0 space, called Maps, that's competing with Jive and with, I'm forgetting the other large player. They have 40 people in the company, and they arguably have a better product, and they built it in about 12 months. And why? Because they're only working on the things that matter, and everything else they just subscribe to as services. So then you get to software as a service, and you can start to buy and build and subscribe to services, and if you like that service, continue using it. If you don't like it, you move to another service. And this is changing behaviors in enterprises all around the world, where people are starting to recognize that they don't buy shrink-wrap software, they just rent what they need for an outcome. And it's changing the business model of organizations. They don't have CapEx costs, the purchase of capital equipment. They have an OpEx cost. They have to pay on a continual basis for the use of the software that they need. And if their needs change, they can scale or contract organically. It's a completely different model. And then finally, I think there's experience as a service. You see this with material design, which came out from Google, but there are other UI and UX frameworks that are starting to become very easy for us to build applications in a rapid pace and almost sort of build very quickly without a lot of effort. So these things are actually turning into a new way to build software. And teams that take this approach can build software in weeks, not months or years. And that's changing a lot of things in our industry. One of the things that's changing for us in the UX community is we care about research, right? You know, how many of you care about user research? Right? Okay. More hands, please. You guys all should care about user research. In the lean, agile world and a hypothesis-driven world, if the software is very easy to change and course correct, there's a lot of pressure to just ignore research and make something. And then in the making, if it doesn't work, it's so easy to fix it, you just kind of pivot and do it again. And then you do it again and do it again. And that iterative model eventually will get to an outcome that matters for people. And there's nothing wrong with that approach, and many startups operate that way. But you miss the opportunity of humanizing the software, to making it real for people, to make actual problems that are solved. And it's an issue that we have to be aware of because it places pressure on us. We may not get as much time as we've had in the past to do design work in an organization that starts to consume software this way. We have to be kind of ahead of the curve. We have different roles and jobs that we may have to take in the process. All right, so then there's a bunch of other things. There's some inversions, and there's a system inversion going on right now. So historically, in large-scale organizations, you had systems of record, and you had siloed applications. The applications, there was a travel application, there was a enterprise resource planning application, a CRM application, a healthcare application, a human resources application in your work environment. And even in our customer space, in the phones that we carry around in our pockets, we all have hundreds of apps that are built by different people that do different purpose-built things. And they're all a point record connected to a point application to a point in time. We have systems of engagement. So you think about social media, Facebook and Snapchat and WeChat. These are building social graphs that connect us together. So a single application is starting to have more functionality and capability. WeChat's a great example of that. There's all kinds of crazy things you can do in WeChat that are beyond just communicating. And so you're starting to get systems where the social graph, how people are organized, are actually more important than the data graph of systems of record. And I would argue that we're moving finally into this system of assets. And you are an asset, but this television monitor right here is an asset, and the light in the ceiling is an asset, and the jet engine on the jet that you flew here, if you came here by an airplane, is an asset. And we're in a moment where, through a lot of different technologies, that information can be aggregated in a temporal moment in time and can provide you insight and just the right software for just the right thing for just that right moment. So we're in this transition moment where we're kind of inverting the systems that we're in. And then there's all these other mega trends going on that are really, really fast and kind of crazy, right? So we've heard a little bit about AI and machine learning. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Actually, I'll talk about it in a second. IoT, we talked about that. Security, there's a bunch of changes happening in security around the world. Edge computing and blockchain. So these are big developments that are happening faster than we can actually comprehend or adopt into the applications that we're writing. And so we don't know how to use them, and sometimes when we use them, there's unintended consequences. I thought Cynthia's talk earlier today was really awesome to talk about being mindful in the decisions that you make when you're a designer. So let's talk first a little bit about machine learning. So it's moving really, really, really fast. I'll tell you a really funny story. I have both an Amazon Echo, and now that I work at Google, I have a Google Home in my house. And we had the Echo for about a year and a half, and we just got the Google Home. And both of them were in our kitchen. And the idea we were going to retire the Amazon Echo. It's not that I don't have anything against Amazon. I just work for Google. So I wanted to use the Google Home. And my wife really loved working with the Amazon Echo, so we were trying to figure out what the differences were between the two devices. And somehow we activated both of them through, asking their questions. So in the Echo, you say Alexa, and then it knows to listen, and you ask a question. And Google Home, you can either say, Hey Google, or Okay Google, and it knows to answer a question. And so they were both listening to us. And we asked a question, and the Echo said, I'm sorry, I don't know how to answer that question. And the Google Home said, that makes two of us. Now, that was like mind-bending for me. I was just like, there was an engineer somewhere in Mountain View who was waiting for that to happen, built an Easter egg in the system to be able to have that happen. But it was just awesome. But it was a moment of what are our AI overlords going to be like? How are they going to communicate with us? And how we're going to work with them. But there's some other things that are really interesting. And just to make an example, I added a slide to this presentation around what's going on in machine learning, because there's something that happened last week that you may not have heard about that was really, really amazing to me. So Google has this group called DeepMind, and they have this project called Alphago. And Alphago is an AI that plays the Asian board game Go, right? So have people familiar with Go as a board game? Yeah, it's super complex game. Apparently, there are more possible ways to play Go than there are atoms in the universe. Okay, so brute force computation cannot be used to solve Go and play Go. It's much more complicated than chess. And so we built an AI, and the first version of it, which is called Alphago Lee, last year around March, beat Lee Sedol, who is a Korean grandmaster Go player. He was 11-time world champion, and it beat him 4 out of 5 matches. And the machine learning model that they built, they gave Go the rules, and then they also showed it a bunch of strategies of how humans play, and over time trained it to be a great Go player, and it got better. So then they came out with AlphaGo Master, and that was earlier this year in May, and it played the current world champion, Chinese gentleman, and it won 3 games in a row, and it was crowned the best Go player in the world, a grandmaster, and Google retired AlphaGo Master at that date. And then something interesting happened last week. Or at the very end of October. They built a new version of Go called Alphago Zero. And Alphago Zero is different because they actually didn't do normal machine learning tricks like show its strategy or how humans played. They just explained the rules, and it played itself. And in 3 days, it was better than Alphago Lee. And in 24 days, it was better than Alphago Master, to the extent that it's played Alphago Master. So you have 2 AIs playing each other, and it's won 100 times to 0. And it uses 10% of the computing resources of the previous generation AI. So a crazy speed of development in this space, and it's only getting faster. And what this means for us is we have to figure out what the boundaries of machine learning are and what AI is. And I'll talk a little bit more about what I think our role is, because I think there's a really interesting role for this community in the AI space. But just to demonstrate, there's a lot going on right now. In the IoT space, I spent 5 years at GE before I joined Google working on Internet of Things, or what we called at the time Industrial Internet. And it was really this idea of connecting sensors and devices to the internet so that we could grab the data streams coming off of them and make better decisions about how those machines worked. And Cisco estimates by 2020 there'll be 50 billion devices connected to the internet. So it'll be more than the phone population. Actually, the things in the rooms that we're in and the machines that provide services to us in the world are all going to start to become connected. And there's a really good reason to do it, because if you can connect them and start to understand the behavior of a machine, you can maintain them differently over time. And just to give you an example in that regard, if you flew here, it used to be in aviation, well, it still is the case because they haven't changed the rules, but in aviation, jet engines have to be taken off wing after a certain number of hours and inspected and repaired. And for good reason, you want your jet engine to keep working, because if it doesn't work, that's not a good thing. But it turns out every airline operates differently, right? So a good example, Finnair, which flies out of Helsinki, versus Emirates, which flies out of Dubai, right? Two large airlines, same airplane, same engines, same, came out of the factory, a week apart from each other, should operate the same way, but they don't. And the reason is the airlines operate differently, right? So Finnair wants to be the world's most ecological airline, and so they take off very slowly to get to cruising altitude. They get to fly through very pristine, clear Arctic air. There's no particulates or pollution in the air. They even do the really interesting trick. They have a lot of flights from Helsinki to Asia, and they have their flights all take off at the same time, or within minutes of each other, and then they follow each other in their slipstream, which saves fuel along the way. And then you look at Emirates. Emirates is all about comfort, right? So they want to get you to cruising altitude as quickly as possible. So they take off like straight up. If you've ever been in an Emirates flight, it literally is like you're in the back of your seat. But then all of a sudden the bell comes off and you can walk around. And you're like, wow, how did they get up there so fast? Well, they burn a ton of fuel to do that. And then they have the added issue that in the first 5,000 meters of air in Dubai, it's full of sand, which is not good for jet engines. It turns into like sticky glue or sugar. And so the same two engines on one plane, or the same two engines on one plane, two engines on another plane, are going to behave very differently over time. And if you can connect those engines and the data streams that come off of them to analytics, you can actually start to predict when they're going to fail and when you need to repair them. And so that it changes maintenance contracts, it changes how you operate your organization, it changes what kinds of materials you might put in the engine. You might decide for Emirates that you use a rare earth mineral because it's going to make the engine last longer, and for Finnair, you don't need to do that. So you have this moment where the technology of just connecting the devices is actually changing the operational behavior of the machines so we can get more effective use out of them over time. So that's going to have a dramatic change in everything we do. And we're starting to see that. Everyone thought IoT would be about the consumer and at home, and there's some things that are starting to happen there. But the big play in that space is an industry, because the savings are so huge. If you can get your power system to deliver more energy at a lower cost or more effectively, then you don't have to build another power plant. You can provide services. It becomes a self-fulfilling business opportunity. Security. So security is a huge issue, right? We talk about it all the time. Where I come from, it's like in the papers all day because we have this crazy Russia in the politics thing going on in our country. I won't go into that, but almost every organization in the world is insecure. And there are changing models for how you can secure and dissuade hackers from getting into your environment. It turns out cloud is actually far more secure than traditional IT environments because you can constrain the entry points. The versions of the software are always the most updated. The networks can be encrypted. So there's a huge amount of innovation going on there. And because security is a big issue for large business, they need to act on it, right? If you go to a large company and tell them, hey, if we've discovered you have this vulnerability, they have to fix it. If they don't fix it and someone hacks it and it gets out in the press or their stockholders find out about it, that executive isn't at that company anymore. The stakes are too high. So there's a huge revolution going on in security and technology side. Then edge compute, right? So this is a picture of the Edison chips, like the size of a SD card. It's a tiny little chip. For high-value assets, you can put thousands of cores next to them at low cost. So you could do very computationally heavy analytics at the edge of the device. So the edge compute is actually a part of IoT being successful. You can put small boxes in environments and do computing there. You can extend the cloud all the way out to the edge. You probably haven't heard this term yet, but they call it fog computing. I don't know why they called it fog, but it's called fog computing, which is the sort of edge of the cloud network. And then blockchain, which has gotten a lot of publicity. Blockchain is also going to help on the security side because the transaction model in blockchain is very, very difficult to crack. You see a lot of financial institutions looking at it as a way to distribute their ledgers in a more effective way. It has some downsides and some positives, but there's a lot of energy going on inside the blockchain conversation. So again, we're in this moment where all of these disruptive things are going on, and if you're a leader in a large organization, you don't really know what to do because it's just all moving too fast. We're moving also, I think, into this notion of away from mobile first to context first. So, how many people know the term mobile first, right? So Luke Wroblewski, came up with the term. It says design for the mobile phone first, and then the desktop second, because the audience most of our computing now happens in the devices we carry in our pockets, and especially in emerging markets, that's the only computing platform that people have. You go to places like India and Southeast Asia, and I would imagine in parts of South America where people their first real computing device is a mobile phone. But my argument is that we're going to move more to a contextual type of environment. You already see it in things that you use. So if you use Facebook, Facebook uses algorithms to decide what to show you based on who you interact with, what time of day it is, where you are locationally. And so they're starting to give you contextual relevant information. If you think about what Google's doing, what we call the Google Assistant, it knows a lot about you. It knows where you are because it's connected to the maps. It knows things about your calendar and your buying behavior, and it can make suggestions if you're willing to be open about that. So this notion of being contextual is really, really, really empowering, and I think we're going to be moving away from lots and lots of apps to more sort of singular apps that bring micro applications into them that allow you to operate and do something of value when you need it, and then when you don't need it, it just goes away. And the next time you might need that same capability, you might get a different piece of small software that's better or different or more contextually relevant to the moment you're in. So how do you design for that? Right? How do you create applications that are really small and lightweight and respect location and time and activity and connect to machine learning APIs? It's really, really a big challenge. The company I work for, we're all in on this, right? So Sundar Pichai, made an announcement last year that we were going to be an AI-first company, which to me basically means context first. It means recognizing that there are tools that are going to augment our capabilities and allow us to learn new things. The interesting thing about Alphago, the example I gave earlier, the system that played this Asian board game, is it discovered whole new strategies of how to play the game, which now humans use to play each other with and become more successful. So it actually created new creativity for humans to consume. So there's something going on here around this conversation. All right, so what do we do now? It's an interesting moment, right? No one really understands these ingredients. It's sort of like learning, being given a whole new set of ingredients and learning a new cooking and not sure what a tasty, delicious meal is with the new ingredients. And especially IT organizations. So if you go into a large enterprise that has 20 years of experience, they don't know how to use these tools. They have a general lack of imagination about how to use them differently. But what they try to do is say, we'll take what we've done before and we'll just do it over here. And then they miss the opportunity of these new capabilities to change or transform their businesses. And there's a lot of ambiguity. People are worried about their job, right? They look at the situation and say, I manage the data center. What's my job if we move it all over to a cloud organization and we don't have a data center? Or I provision systems. What happens when I can just use software to do that? And then there's this issue around what they're called a prediction framework. Jeff Hawken, who is the guy who created Palm Computing, and then after he got out of software, he's invested a ton of his money in sort of brain research. And he coined the term prediction framework. And he believes it's a notion of our intelligence. And the concept behind it is we make decisions based on our previous experience. It's really straightforward, right? So given the things that you've learned, and you encounter a new situation, you use that past experience to guide you on what to do next. But what happens when the world changed and nobody told you, and that previous experience isn't valuable anymore? You're in a really tough spot because what you take into the future doesn't work anymore. And I believe we're in one of those moments. So we have to have some compassion for our friends in IT and our friends in development because they are struggling right now mightily. And I'll talk a little bit about how we can help them and actually improve our lot as we move forward. So no one understands the new ingredients. There's a lot of ambiguity. The prediction framework, the mental model needs to be rewritten. There's a new way to build, right? So we established that with all these different stacks and technologies. The big challenge for organizations is what to build. We used to have this very incrementalist mindset, 5% faster or 2% cheaper, or we're going to add this capability, and that's going to make us differentiated from our competitor. That doesn't count anymore. You might have to change your whole business model. If you're an elevator company, do you sell elevators or do you sell rides? You could actually make a case that you would sell rides, install the elevator for free, and every time the elevator gets used, the owner of that building would send you some money. And there's actually a really good reason to do that because it places the responsibility of operating that elevator on the elevator company, and they can innovate and build systems that might last longer, might provide better services. So that change, this new way to build and what to build and why, is really challenging for people right now and how to framework. Now, the good news is in this what to build and why conversation is we're really good at this. We're the folks who are the what if people. I don't know if this translates, but I was asking a friend one time in a ski lodge, or I was explaining to some friends of mine who what I do, and he goes, I know what you do. You're an ifnographer. You work on the science of if. And I'm like, yeah, that's it. And then another friend chimed in and said, no, you're not an ifnographer, you're a possibilitarian. It's much more religious. There's a movement behind it. You can just, people will follow you if you tell them you're a possibilitarian. You are all about what's possible. Well, that's what this community can do. Designers are about the art of the possible. And we're in this specific moment where the tools that we use are so ambiguous and difficult to understand, and there's so much new learning that has to go on, that the role of the designer is going to, and my hypothesis is going to grow in its value in organizations if you play your cards right. So we are going to become core to strategy. And some of us are already doing that. In fact, Steve, when he's going to come up and talk after me, is going to talk about design in a whole new area of work and how strategic it is and how it's changing a whole conversation in his community in Australia. I promised Steve I would, wherever Steve is, to prop up his talk. So here's a bunch of things that are happening. So our role is changing. We need to acquire new skills. We need to learn some business skills so that we can communicate with the business and bring our value and say, you know what we need to do right now? We need to make things, to experiment so that we can learn, so we can reframe our prediction framework, so we can retrain our collective intelligence as a team about what's possible so that we can make advances in our business. Research still matters, right? So human insights of human beings, what people are doing, what they're trying to accomplish, doing contextual inquiry, ethnography, defining actionable insights. It turns out, at the end of the day, the technology is not really the important or difficult part. a previous version of this talk, I made the case that, software development had been solved. And my software friends got mad at me and said, no, that's not true. But it's getting so much easier to build. The focus is less on the technical challenges of building and more on what to build as a whole. Be abductive, right? Be the what-if person. Be the person who brings multiple opportunities, multiple options to the table. Use a designer's toolkit. I love this word, juxtaposition. Take two different ideas, mash them up together, and see what happens. Preschool sushi bar, put them together. Maybe it's awesome. I'd like that. Drop my kid off, get some sushi, be good. And then be about making, right? So making is, this is really, I think modern organizations think too much. You have meeting after meeting. How many people has been in the meeting for the meeting? Right? And then there's the meeting for the meeting for the meeting, right? And so in my teams, we always have to have an artifact out of the meeting, whether it's minutes or a drawing or a sketch. There has to be something that comes out of the meeting or we don't have meetings. Because if you're just talking, you're not getting anywhere. You're not retraining your mind. You're not learning a new prediction framework. You're not expressing the new tools that we're using right now. So learn how to make. So make to think over thinking to make. So we're getting close here. So what does this mean for you, right? What does it mean for all of you? So I think there's some changes going on, right? So if you look on the left, we're the current enterprise stage that we're in is UX is structuring systems. So we do a lot of work. Some people are building design systems to help accelerate and make better quality and beyond brand. We're still in the incrementalism mindset, a little bit of better, a little bit easier, a little bit here. We're getting into patterns. URI frameworks make building easier. We're making friends with engineering because we actually care about engineering now, right? In fact, at GE, I had my own engineering team in the UX organization. If you can ever get away with that, that's an awesome idea. We renamed them design technologists so that the engineering teams wouldn't steal them. If you want to try that out. And then we're moving into this contextual space, right? So the contextual space is really about patterns and best practice, simplifying, bringing design thinking skills to the organization so that you can start crunching what the big strategy problem is, bring your skills in this abductive sort of thinking space. And then where we're headed is we're going into the AI enterprise. And where I think we have a role is that we're great at understanding human behavior. Interaction design, the definition of interaction design is really about the design of behavior. And the secret in machine learning is the model. Now, I was a little scared with the Alphago example where it taught itself how to play Go, but Go has very discrete rules. Humans don't operate that way. We're not rational beings, right? We operate irrationally. We think we operate rationally, but we don't. We operate irrationally. And we have motivations and experiences and things which drive our decisions, which sometimes are difficult to quantify or create a model to describe. So if we're building machine learning models, who better to help craft those than people who are keen observers of human behavior, which is this community. So there's a great opportunity for us as this moves forward to be part of that conversation. Now, be prepared for AIs to start building user interfaces and being okay at it. It's going to happen. So some part of your toolkit or the things that you do normally may change over time, but they're never really going to understand the cultural nuances of particular situations with particular goals and outcomes that humans want. And there's so much to improve in our world that we have plenty of opportunity to be successful in that. So in that space, win with the best artifacts in the beginning part. Start to celebrate your wins. Learn how to speak in a business perspective. That was a really hard thing for me to understand. I would sit in a staff meeting and I would talk about design all the time. And And my boss said, all you do is talk about design. And you don't talk about the business. And I said, well, I'll talk about the business when you talk about design. And he said, okay, what do I need to know about design? And I'll talk about design. So start sharing the conversation. Don't own it so preciously. Actually, there are people, peers, people in your network, people that you work with that do care about it. It may not be their area of expertise, but get them to be champions of it and learn how to speak business. And then, really become the hero of the customer, right? It's the evangelist for what's the outcome. And we are that. We're starting to see that. And if we do that, and we really do it well, then our role is going to change. We're going to go from being a craftsman to a business partner to finally being the actual innovators in business. And my belief is that the actual innovation community is going to be the design community. It's not, yes, there'll be technical advancements, and yes, there'll be breakout technologies, but the things that are going to stick and be valuable to people are going to come from the people in this room, from you, from all of us. And so that, I think, is the part of the story that I'd love to keep us talking about so we can improve our relevance, have more senior roles for people as they mature. UX historically has been this kind of career path that you get to a certain level and then you can't get farther up in the organization. We need to start getting people to be the chief design officer and maybe the CEO of a company, right? Intuit, which is the big tax software company in the United States, just announced a chief design officer in the company. He's chief design officer and product officer. So he's defining the product, but the first word is design, not product. So there's evidence that it's starting to happen. So I think this is where we're headed. To get back to these points, there's a role change for us that we need to be willing to take on that extra burden of understanding business. That research, doing what we do naturally really matters. Be the ethnographers, be the possibilitarians, be the people who go out and figure out what's going on. Use your skills. The power of making and juxtaposition are really, really, really powerful tools. Other groups don't understand it. And you can take two crazy ideas, put them together, and you come up with something that solves the problem more elegantly, more simply, or even discovers a need that was unsaid, but somehow now is met. And so you run to make to think. And so if I leave anything with you, this is notion of making. And I think this is a room of makers. It's a community of makers. This is why I love IXDA. This is why I love ISA conference, and why I'm having such a great time here. Your hospitality has been great. I will leave you with one final thought. Hopefully Google translated this the right way. We'll see. So I can't read it. I'll let you read it. But I'll say it in a second. It's from Charles Eames. And Charles Eames had this point of view that said, if you can understand how the thing is made and the beauty of that, then you can actually make more beautiful things. And so we need to understand these technologies that are happening. We need to understand these trends. We need to understand what our development colleagues are going through to actually do great work. So here's the quote. We'll see if it works. I'll leave it up there for a few seconds. And with that, get your pictures. You good? Thank you.
Alô, muito obrigado por a sua palestra. Muito boa, muito inspiradora. E algumas dúvidas. Você falou acerca a nossa possibilidade de imaginar coisas diferentes do que tem agora. Nós temos agora alguns problemas muito grandes, a escala planetária. Por exemplo, a base do que os mantém vivos a nossos, os sistemas democráticos, participação da cidadão na toma de decisões. Qual é a sua ideia, uma visão de como essa possibilidade de interação entre Big Data, Artificial Intelligence, a gente pode funcionar positivamente para resolver problemas de uma escala que vai por cima das nações?
Wow, that was a difficult question to answer. But I love the question. It is the right question, right? I think it's up to us to figure that out. And I'll let you guys in on a secret. Personally, I have an intention statement about how I operate in the world. And to me, every day I wake up, I think about the communities I work in. I think about form and behavior. Form being I'm an architect by training. Behavior is the interaction designer. And I think about the common good. Like, what are the things I can do that make things better for people? And I'm really interested in near-term innovation, which I have this term. I didn't use it in the talk, but I call it becomingness. It's sort of what's emerging. And we need people with a distinctly human perspective who care about dignity and quality of life and not screwing up the planet, being the smartest people in this technology space and the loudest in the room. And so if I could leave you with anything, and I don't have an answer for you, except to say, be the change you want to see and be a part of that. And that's why I love this community, is that everybody, for the most part, is committed to that. This is a community of people who really believe that through better experiences, we can create better relationships with each other, and we can solve really big problems. So hopefully that helps.
Hi, Greg. First of all, thanks for the presentation. And I would like to ask, a few months ago, we saw Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg talk about the dangers of AI. And how do you guys handle that in Google? How do you set boundaries and limits to not lose control of it?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm going to say I'm not the right person to answer that, and it's because I'm not a technical AI expert. I know within Google we treat it very seriously. People like to, it's interesting. I've been at Google for just under a year, but it's a fascinating place to work for, and it really does care about privacy. And it really does care about doing the right thing. And people don't think, they think they have all this data, they know all this stuff about you. Nobody in Google knows anything about you. The algorithms know a lot about you, but people don't know anything about you. And so I hope that we enter it with, care to understand it. We're still far away from the sort of dystopian version of, Terminator taking over. But I do share some concern that it could be used in really weird ways, and it could certainly be used, to answer your question earlier, in ways that are not democratic. And we have to be very careful about that. I mean, facial recognition is so powerful now, it can tell how you're feeling. So, what happens when, you walk out of the polling booth and they can tell how you voted? That's not a great place to be. So we need to actually have boundaries. And part of this community could be to maybe design what the bad experience and the good experience could be.
Being a designer and with a more kind of human approach, I personally have a hard time dealing with more technical stuff, more technical subjects. And sometimes I feel overwhelmed with the amount of, everything that you mentioned, blockchain and IoT, all this stuff. And I would ask for, you are in a technical environment.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice for us to keep us up to date in those topics? And the more, we need to know this very well, as you said. And it's so hard to get in touch with this in an understandable way. So do you have any advice to us, being human?
Yeah, I think there are technical people who care about this stuff. So if you can find colleagues who are the technical people around you who care and share, so you can bring your expertise to them and they can bring their expertise to you, that's kind of one path. I think in the next 2 years, we're going to see a lot of content come out. I can't share it, but internally inside of Google, there's a whole UX AI, conversation going on, which will eventually, through conferences and meetings, will come out, and I would expect that would come out of Microsoft and Facebook and other large organizations, which will help educate the community as a whole. So I think we're early in that stage, but I share your pain because it is difficult to stay on top of it, and the pace of change is really, really fast, and it is one of the problems that we're experiencing right now. So I don't think I answered your question, but anyway, it is tough.
Thank you so much, Greg.
All right.